Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Outsider Baseball Notebook. I am finally joined by Bill Staples Jr. I've been trying to set this one up for a while. Bill, how are you doing this evening?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I ran into Bill's work when I was starting my Heavy Johnson Saber bio, and I found what was the best description of the 25th Infantry in Arizona that I had ever found, and it was super helpful. I've gone back to that page a lot since then, even with the Dobie
Cool.
Moore bio. So,
Yeah,
and you are from Arizona, which is helpful. So, can you give us an introduction of who you are and what it is that you do?
sure. Well, I currently live in Arizona. I'm not from Arizona.
Okay. Okay.
I'm a Yankee Texan who lives in Arizona.
Mhm.
So born in New York, raised in Texas, and been a baseball fan my entire life. Of course, I grew up learning all the common Major League Baseball players' names: Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. But I found somewhere around the age of 15, I wanted to learn more about the players you didn't hear much about. So I remember talking about Josh Gibson when I was in high school and Sadahura O, and that led to passions in Negro League history, Asian American, U.S. Japan baseball relations. So I love the game of baseball, but I also love the international aspect of it. So that's what I focus on in my research, which is a part time gig. My full time job is in healthcare marketing and communications. Been doing that for over 20, 25 years, but it has allowed me to pursue my passions on the side. And I've been fortunate enough to travel the world. I've been to Japan, the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame. It's through my work. I've written a couple books and worked on a few documentaries. And the best part of all is I've met wonderful people with connections to this game and who just share their passion and like to connect with others. So that's what I'm doing here tonight.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that intro. Some of it are things that I've started to dive into myself, and some of it is material that I have absolutely no idea about. So that's why I'm
Okay.
excited to ask you about both of those tonight. So I
Well,
guess
I'm sure it goes the other way as well. I'm sure you have a lot of interests that I don't even know about. So I look forward to learning as well.
excellent. So a big reason we're here is we started talking about the 25th Infantry Wreckers. Can
Hmm.
you, I don't maybe to both remind the listener and also just to kind of hear it from your perspective, can you talk about who the 25th Infantry Wreckers were?
I can, but can I share the story of how I not only came to learn about them, but also how my interest in them took a deeper dive?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think some of the questions you had shared kind of set me up for that. So I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, certainly.
So I do have some visual notes. I'm not sure if you're going to share them with your listeners or share them with your viewers at some point, but they're going to help me kind of guide my thinking. So let me go ahead and reference that. Would you like me to share my screen?
You
If
can share your screen as well. Yes.
okay, so let me go ahead and do that. Uh, Make sure I have permission. All right, so you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So it helped me again frame my thinking and put some of my thoughts together. And I'm a visual learner as well, and I like to share through pictures. Some of my favorite presentations are just putting a picture up and just talking, just
Mhm.
so that people can hear the words and see some faces, etc. So this is a famous photograph of the 25th Infantry Wreckers. Seen it referenced from 1913 to 1922. I tend to think it's 1917, and we'll talk about that as we go through this. We just covered this article. This is the Dobie Moore article I wrote in 2019. I wrote it in preparation for the 2020 Centennial Negro League celebration, which I'll talk a little bit about. But that was my inspiration for the timing. But I was familiar with the story prior to that. How I came to learn about the 25th Infantry Records was through my research and interest in Kenichi Zenimura.
Mm.
Zenimura is considered the father of Japanese American baseball. He was born in Hiroshima, Japan in 1900, moved to Honolulu in 1907. He started playing baseball around age 12, and I believe this is 1917, where I started to, as he got older, I was seeing him in the newspaper articles right next to the 25th Infantry Records.
Mm.
So I saw that his proximity was very close. Again, this is a doubleheader game where they played in game one of the Honolulu Asahi against a team called the Hawaiis, and then the 25th Infantry Wreckers played right after them.
Mm.
Then he was just a little bit younger than some of the top players of the 25th Infantry Wreckers. So he didn't actually compete head to head, but he was well familiar with them. And later on, their career had started to intersect. But before that, I'll talk about my interest in the Negro Leagues as well and how I came but to learn about that. But this is where I was first introduced to the Wreckers was through Zenimura. And just a little background, I live in Arizona, about 15 miles or 20 miles from the historic Japanese American incarceration site from World War II called Gila
Mm.
River, where Zenimura built a field in 1942. And they played baseball through the 3 years that they were incarcerated. And it was through that that I first learned about Zenimura.
Oh,
Never heard about him until 2004 when I moved here to Arizona. So, but it's
wow.
a long story as to why I did that research. I was basically exploring ways to become a coach at the Gila River Indian community, and I took a detour and got
Mm.
caught up in the history of Kenichi Zenimura. So with that, these are the two books that I ended up writing. The first one was Kenichi Zenimura, Japanese American baseball pioneer, published through McFarland in about 2011. The follow-up was Gentle Black Giants, a history of Negro Leaguers in Japan, which was really it's a two-part book. First part is a translation of a book written by Kaz Sayama, who's a Japanese baseball writer, lives in Japan. He wrote it first in 1985. It was about the Philadelphia Royal Giants touring Japan, which included one of the 25th Infantry Wreckers in 1927 and the Bullet Joe Rogan in 1932-33. But the second part was all this great research that Sayama didn't have access to in 1985, that the birth of the internet and the publishing of digital newspapers found a whole bunch of other sources that really complemented the story. So that's what part two is. It's a whole bunch of essays and articles and scrapbooks and photos, etc.
Oh, awesome.
But with that, I want to go back in time. This is Arizona, and this is my spring break trip of 2013 with my family. We
Mm.
did this wonderful tour around the Southwest. Chandler, Arizona is where I live. We drove on over to Albuquerque, New Mexico, really enjoyed the beautiful scenery there. But on our way back, we went down to Bisbee, which is has one of the oldest ballparks here in Arizona, called Warren Park. Have you ever heard of that by any chance?
No.
Okay, so I'll share a little bit about that. But then right after that, we went over to Fort Huachuca in Sierra Vista. And there we visited the museum where they had this beautiful exhibit for the 25th Infantry Wreckers. So unfortunately, that exhibit doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
I'm going to share a virtual version of that so everyone who didn't get a chance to see it can see it now. So here's me and the family back in 2013 at Warren Ballpark, where I later learned that some of the old 1919 Black Sox players got to play after they were kicked out of baseball. They came down to Arizona and played at this ballpark. So some of the locals call it the original Field of Dreams because that's where the old Chicago White Sox got to play.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, yeah. But after that, so we went over to the Fort Huachuca Museum, and they had this exhibit there, and they had this statue of a player in a replica uniform. And for those of us who have seen the photographs, it's pretty darn close to what
Mm.
it looked like. It was a very simple exhibit. It had two panels on the side. But here's the nice summary of the official description of who the 25th Infantry Wreckers were and the Black Soldiers or the Buffalo Soldiers of baseball. Given that this is audio, would you like me to read it or?
Yeah, certainly. That would be great.
All right. So this is what the Fort Huachuca historians agreed upon as the description of the importance of this team. So Buffalo Soldiers began playing competitive baseball in the 1890s. Legendary Negro League players in the 1920s and 30s started playing baseball in the Army, and their path to fame went through southern Arizona. In 1913, the 25th Infantry, stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, assembled an all-star team named the Wreckers. For the next 5 years, They dominated baseball on the island, defeating other Army teams, local teams from the plantations, Portuguese, Chinese, and Japanese teams, college and all-star exhibition teams from the mainland. During World War I, the Army stationed the 25th Infantry Regiment at Camp Stephen Little in Nogales, Arizona, to guard the border. There they played the 10th Cavalry Regiment from Fort Huachuca and civilian teams from both sides of the border. After the war, soldier athletes were attracted by the new professional Negro Leagues. 8 players from the 25th left the Army for pro baseball. Despite that loss, the 25th Infantry Regiment continued to field strong baseball teams from 1928 to 1941, winning Army baseball championships for a number of years. So there's your official description of the team and why they were important. So,
Love
and
it.
we can have just lighter conversation around who they were and share some photographs and talk about our favorite players from
Yeah,
baseball.
certainly. Yeah, a couple things stand out to me there. One is that 8 players from the 25th left for pro baseball. It seems like I keep finding more
Yeah.
connections from the team to the Negro Leagues. It could be, I think, 15 or so that I've made that
Oh, really?
connection with so far.
Okay.
And I have them all listed, but a few of them I am interested in hearing your perspectives on. So I'm sure we'll get to that later. But yeah, this is great.
Okay. Okay. Hey, and if I have some knowledge, I'll share it. And if I don't know, I'm going to say that, but I
That's
can look
perfect.
into it and I'll get back to you as well. But this is what the exhibit looked like. And you've probably seen some of these photographs on the side. I know
Mhm.
you've interacted with the Fort Huachuca Museum and the historians there. They've got a great collection of photographs. These photos are actually listed as 1913 in the archives. I tend to think they're actually a little bit later, probably around 1917 or 15, 16, 17, based on some of the players.
Right. Rogan in particular, like, didn't arrive until 1915, so that would be a
Yeah.
giveaway there.
Yeah. And these are just a variety of some of the photos that they had displayed. They did actually share some digital photos of these with me as well, and I thought I'd share them with you just so you can
Excellent.
kind of take them in and check them out. But these are my kids back then. I didn't really fully appreciate what they were seeing. But here they are now. The kids are all grown up. They're 10 years later. This is my son.
Oh
There
wow.
he is, at age 13. Here he is at 23. My daughter's older as well. But this is where my passion for Negro League history started. It's a family connection.
Mhm.
So this is my mother-in-law, Dorothy Ross Newman, and this is her her uncle, Robert Clayton Bailey. Uh, and it turns out he actually played professional baseball in the Texas Negro Leagues. And so these are some of his teammates and people who he competed against. So
Oh
here he
wow.
is playing for the Dallas Black Giants, which for one year they changed their name to the Marines, and the Black Broncos changed their name to the Aces in honor of the returning troops from World War
Hmm.
One. So then they went back to the name. So here's Robert Bailey playing second base. O'Neill Pullen is the catcher on his team. William Ross is the pitcher, and these are the photographs of those guys there. And for the Black Aces, you see Biz Mackey as a pitcher and catcher in this game. The Black Aces won the championship in 1919. But I had actually researched this before I even knew that Great Uncle Bob had played for the Dallas Black Giants. So
Wow.
it was cool to find that family connection in the research. And there's a great saying, Native American saying, that the honor of one is the honor of all. And Dorothy had asked me to research Bob Bailey's career. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot about him, but I do feel like researching all the other players, his teammates, is a way to honor him and
Mhm.
all those who really didn't get the recognition they deserved back then. So that's part of my passion in researching this story as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, just to see he was playing against
I
Bismacky,
know.
and is that Crush Holloway there as
It
well?
is, yeah.
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 Wow.
Yeah. So many great players coming out of San Antonio in 1919. And if I didn't share it with you before, I can share my very first article that I wrote in baseball history was about Biz Mackey's early career in Texas, because I found a lot of overlap with the 27 tour and Zenimura, and I just wanted to learn more about Biz Mackey. So I can share that with you just if you want to learn more about the Texas Negro Leagues and how that was a great resource of players for the 1920 inaugural season for the
Oh,
Negro Leagues.
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And so that was in preparation for our celebration here in Arizona. So we put on this nice celebration February 29th, 2020, here in Arizona, celebrating the ties, the Negro League ties with our state, and of course, Black baseball. So you can see the 25th Infantry records were part of that. We talked about Ford Smith, who's the only Negro League player born in Arizona. He played for the Kansas City Monarchs. And then Buck O'Neill, being, of course, the famous spokesperson that he was, but also the first African American coach
Mhm.
in Major League Baseball. And he got his start in the Cactus League here in Arizona. So we were just connecting all the dots and sharing that story. So that statue that was I saw back in 2013. I contacted the museum. I said, "Hey, can we borrow that for our exhibit here in Phoenix?" And so I drove down and got it.
Oh,
I
wow.
brought it back up to Phoenix. I ended up calling him Bob Fagan, because of
Hmm.
all the players, I thought it kind of looked like him.
It's funny
So,
in this last shot you're showing me, I see a little bit of Rogan, to be honest,
oh, do you? Okay, fair enough.
Fagan's a good one too, because he was
Maybe
the
it's like
one in
or
the.
it's a Rorschach ink blot test. You
There you
see
go.
your favorite player in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Steve Gregory. He's the museum technician at the Fort Huachuca Museum. I believe you may have communicated with him at some
Yes.
point. Yeah. So here he is wrapping up Bob to bring him to Phoenix. And Bob stayed in my office for about a week before the exhibit opened, which I thought was a little creepy because we had a body wrapped up in our house. So it was kind of funny. So the exhibit opened. It was at the George Washington Carver Museum, and great turnout. And the Arizona Diamondbacks were kind enough to send over a crew from Fox News, Fox Sports, and they
Oh,
did a
cool.
really nice segment on the whole history of Arizona, but with a little feature on the 25th Infantry as
Oh,
well.
excellent.
So I have a link if you want to check that out. There was a pitcher by the name of Brandon Webb, who played for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So he was actually speaking during this time, and he was sharing all of his awards that he had won throughout his career. And he was super proud of this Bullet Rogan award that he won from the Negro League Museum.
Oh,
So he talks about that in there. But so that's what the statue is here. It's the Wilbur Bullet Rogan. Uh, oh, what is it? Kind of Lefty Award? No, not Lefty Award. Legacy Award. That's what it is. And Brandon Webb won it that year
oh,
for, I
wow.
guess he had a great season. But that's a whole nother conversation about awards in Major League Baseball and a variety of ways that different players could be honored. But
Mhm.
I thought that was nice there. So I just wanted to share that. So this was the article that I wrote, and we can talk about some of the details if you want there. But this photograph kind of, I keep coming back to that. And I know we've had conversations about who these players are. I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of go back to some of the earlier publications that first talked about this photograph. And the
Right.
earliest one I could find was 1988 with John Hallway's Black Ball Stars, Negro League Pioneers. And this is the first one I could find, and maybe you know of another where Hurley McNair is mentioned,
Yeah, and
because I
Andy
know there's
Cooper
been
as well.
and Andy Cooper, yeah, and also the year 1922, which we know by 1922 most of these players are in Kansas City and someplace else.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so I thought that was interesting. And then I wanted to share the work that I started and you responded to. And I think others will add to this as well as the research unfolds. But this is the team that I see, and I put some question marks by the ones that really are uncertain at this point. So I know for a fact that the second person is Robert Fagan from Company K, Fred Gallia in the back row, George Jasper, James Big Chief Waterhouse. Allie Crafton is the player have identified that people tend to think is Hurley McNair
Right.
in this photo. And then, based on the research I can find and the timing, I think possibly that's one of the team captains, or excuse me, the team managers named Ernest Carr. Um, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'll put a question mark next to it.
Mhm.
And then the next, Dobie Moore, Bullet Rogan, Lem Hawkins. There's a lot of Smiths and Johnsons that are kind of
Mhm.
floating around. And based on some photographs, I was wondering if that was a Smith. And then, of course, Oscar Heavy Johnson from Company K.
That looks, I think it was Steven who provided one of the photos from the display,
Yeah.
and one was of Smith,
Yeah.
and it looks a lot like the Smith you have there.
Okay.
He looks, man, he looks like he could play today. Just the guy was
Yeah. Yeah.
he looks like a modern infielder. And what's interesting about him is you have the J first initial here. Um, he's known on seam heads as Saki Smith because
Oh, is that him?
there was
Okay.
like one reference to the shortstop uh, appreciating Saki or something like that, and they didn't have anything for a first name, so that's what they ended up using. But
Oh, interesting.
Jay is about the most that we have to go on. I was just reading last night in one of Bill McNeil's books where he was wondering if it was a later 1920s player. I forget exactly which one. Cleo Smith, I think he referenced in the
Hmm.
book. But Smith would have been 15 in 1915 when this
Okay.
Smith joined the team. So I don't think that's likely.
Well, that's really that's great information. But the Saki part, that's actually just the one of many cross-cultural connections with the Japanese community and the African American community, and we'll touch on a few others.
Right.
But that's cool. But I've also seen this Smith, at least this individual in this photograph, incorrectly identified as Bullet Rogan. Have you ever seen those photos where they call that particular player Bullet Rogan?
Oh no, I haven't seen that.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
tell you right here in this one, Goliath looks a little bit like Rogan, but
Oh, in
uh,
the yeah, yeah, yeah,
in the back there.
yeah. All right, so I wanted to share that for the listeners and viewers, just based on how our understanding of history and the more information is shared. By the way, going back to Hallway, I have a lot of respect for the work that most of these historians have put out in the time in which they worked, given some of the limitations with
Mhm.
resources. Because I think what they benefited from was they actually talked to some of the people who were there. There's a
Right.
plus minus with that, I have found that yes, you get to meet the people who were intimately involved. However, their memories really aren't that good. So you get a lot of misinformation. But what I also think is happening is that there's seeds of truth in there. And if you can find that right kernel of the truth and kind of, uh, strip down the incorrect information, it leads to a proper resource or the research. And a good example of that is the work we did with Zenimura and the Philadelphia Royal Giants. My friend Kirio Nakagawa, who's the premier historian on Japanese American baseball, he's kind of like John Hallway with Negro League history. He was there early on when these players were still alive, and he interviewed them. And he got all these great stories from them, but maybe about 70% of it was correct. 30% was incorrect because of their memories being, bad as you get old. But they had remembered as young men playing against the Philadelphia Royal Giants in 1925. The thing was, the Royal Giants didn't exist in 1925. Through our research, we found that they were called the LA White Sox.
Mm.
And from 1925 to 1927, Lon Goodwin changed their name to the Philadelphia Royal Giants. And so it was all the same players that they played against in Japan. But as historians, we had to unpeel the incorrect information and find the LA White Sox. Anyway, to me, I would imagine that John Hallway probably had a conversation with somebody who was there and they helped him identify the players and just based on what they knew that they probably got some misinformation. So
Right. And I think a lot of the confusion about Andy Cooper, I've seen that published a few times that Andy Cooper was a part of the team in Hawaii, but he was actually never a part of the team at all. It was
yeah,
Alfred Army Cooper who was with them beginning in Arizona,
yeah,
but then for several years afterwards. And
right.
here, the player who admittedly does look a lot like Hurley McNair, you mentioned, is Allie Crafton. And now I wonder. This is one of the questions I kind of had hoped to ask you. Have you
Yeah.
seen any type of confirmation that McNair actually did play for the team?
I can't find him with the 25th Infantry, but I do get the impression that he left for the military. So I tend to think that because he was surrounded once he joined the Monarchs, surrounded by a bunch of 25th Infantry players. And he somehow got lumped into that. And then with the photographic misidentification, it kind of incorrectly confirmed it, and people just went along with it.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to find it, but that doesn't mean it's not true. It's one of those seeds of truth, and we've got to find out the actual facts around it.
Yeah, that's one of my goals because he's the third Saber bio I signed up to write. So one of the
Okay.
big things we'll be finding out if he actually did play for the 25th or not. And it might
Yeah.
have just been that he joined the 25th and they
Yeah.
weren't playing then
Yeah.
because he was right around the 1918, 1919 when not a whole lot of baseball was going on. They kind of picked it back up in
Yeah.
1919, it seems.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the soldiers, excuse me, yeah, a lot of the African American soldiers went and served somewhere.
Right.
So maybe he was on his way to being stationed somewhere to go and serve, and then the war ended. Who knows? Yeah, really got to dive into the military records, I think, to find that one.
Right.
Yeah.
Another name that I has popped up a little bit recently, just when looking at a John Hallway book, and then again it came up. I think it was Bill McNeil that quoted it. Was a player named Joe Taylor who talked about
Yeah.
Rogan and Linder. Linder is another one that I haven't like gotten any concrete evidence, but I believe he did play with the
Okay.
team in Arizona. But Joe Taylor is one that I hadn't seen come up. Have you seen this name at all?
I haven't. And to my surprise, I would expect the historians at Fort Huachuca to have documented that name because they've gone through, and I think I've shared some of the military photographs where they're all in uniform and they
Mhm.
have numbers next to them. And they've gone through and written down the number of the soldier and then the name of the ball player so that you could identify who did play ball. And I don't recall seeing Taylor listed.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know what to make of that. And I did do a quick search for Joe Taylor in Arizona, associated with 25th Infantry, and there was only one reference, and it appeared to be a side story. It wasn't germane to the team.
Mhm.
So yeah, more mysteries to solve, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I did want to share with you some of the other photographs. So now I have this relationship with the Fort Huachuca Museum, and they've shared some material with me that maybe they shared with you through email, but I haven't seen it published anywhere. So I wanted to share just a few things just for us to have a conversation around.
Mhm.
So I think we've all seen this. It was on an auction maybe over 10 years ago, maybe longer. But there was a version of that with the Fort Huachuca Museum. Have you ever seen this one
I
where the
have,
players
yes.
are compressed together, and it has the note down on the bottom for Captain Harbaugh, and it's signed by Cheney. Does this ring a bell? Did we discuss this? Harbaugh and Cheney?
Yeah, we briefly did talk about them, but I would love for
Okay.
you to speak about it for the listeners here.
Sure, sure. And correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have my notes in front of me on this, but the Captain Harbaugh is actually the 8-year-old kid in the middle as the bat boy.
Right.
And Cheney may be, if he's not in the photograph, uh, it could be the gentleman down at the far end who was very old at the time, once that Captain Harbaugh grew up and became quite prominent in the military.
Mhm.
So that's my understanding is that the individual in the middle grew up to become like a general, fairly prominent in the military. But he served as the bat boy while his father was stationed at the Schofield Barracks.
I
So it's
love
kind
that
of cool
story.
that there's
Yeah.
some military connection there. So again, just sharing that photograph. For those who don't know the background, these are some of the files that they have at the Fort Huachuca Museum. Basically, all of the soldiers in their uniform. And then in their notes, as I was referencing earlier, they've gone through and they've earmarked each one. So you know that Soldier 126 is Samuel J. Ware, who they've identified as a player. So that's just one example there. But that's what it would look like if you went and visited the museum and looked at their archives.
And what's interesting is I don't have a Samuel J. Ware. I have first initial L, where
Oh, really?
a player who was also had the nickname Cavalry Jack. And I'm
Oh,
curious if you
wow.
know if Cavalry Jack is Samuel J, or if
I
that's
don't know,
anything you have
but
seen.
maybe that J is Jack.
It could be. I'll have to
Yeah.
keep digging. Like you said,
Okay.
this is all just kind of peeling things back. And
There we are. Yeah. This is what each photograph looks like. They have the original negative, and then they have a black and white version of it in this. And then you can see the folder up on the top, the tab, and they have it listed as 1913. And this is Waterhouse.
see, I this is one I don't have yet. I don't
Oh,
have
you
a
don't have the
version of.
Waterhouse photo?
Yeah, that's a beauty.
Okay. Well, maybe this is what I have. There's four versions of each photograph from those files. There's like two JPEGs, and then or no, two JPEGs, and then two TIFFs, different sizes. And then they have the name of the soldier on the back or the player. So these are Smith, Swinton, and Rogan, which you've
So
seen.
that's what I mean about Smith. I mean, he looks like he could be playing today. Look at that guy.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to share that. This is just two of the photographs that I thought were really interesting. One, I'm a big Bob Fagan fan, and we'll talk about him later because you had to ask me who am I researching and where is it taking me. But this is a really nice photograph of this first baseman. And without this information here, I wouldn't have known who it is. This is Herring.
Right. So that's Roland Herring,
Is
it
it?
looks
Okay.
like. Um,
Not to
and
be confused with Roland Heeman from the Arizona Diamondbacks.
right. And also not to be confused with Mose Herring, who
Oh,
was with the 25th in Arizona.
oh,
Uh,
really?
and
It's
then in
not
night,
Mose Herring?
no, it's a different player.
Okay.
From what I've gathered, I have
Okay.
found a Roland Herring, and it looks like, and he did play first base. So
Interesting. It's not the same person as Moses.
no.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. I wanted to share something interesting with you. So I have these photographs. As technology continues to improve, we know there's a lot of artists out there who are colorizing photographs. One might think that an artist colorized this. This was colorized through artificial intelligence. There's a tool out there where you can upload photographs and it scans it and tries to determine what the colors were. This is actually pretty darn close, I
Hmm.
think, with the uniform.
Yeah.
It does a really good job with skin tone. So I think we're going to start seeing more Negro League historical photographs colorized. But I think it does raise a lot of questions about authenticity and, just because you can do it, should you do it?
Right.
That question comes up quite a bit in Japanese American incarceration photographs.
Hmm.
I think more like the darker sides of US history.
Right.
There's some questions about maintaining that authenticity and what it felt like back then. Anyway, not to go too far into a tangent, but I thought it was interesting to look at these photographs with the colorization. So there's Rogan. Again, this is not human. This is technology that did that. And you can also see the imperfections. It doesn't
Hmm.
really understand blues and reds that well. So you can see how one arm is blue and one is red. And
Right.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting now. So I just wanted to share that with you where I think the research and how it's being presented will the direction it's going to go. Oh, and there's your favorite right there. So
Oh, Oscar.
yeah, it does a really good job, I think, with browns and dirt, especially skin tone as well. So I just want to share some of the other photographs reversing in time. This is from 1943. It's not the 25th Infantry. I think it's another division, but that's actually Lena Horne right in the middle there. She came for the Rube Foster field dedication at Fort Huachuca, along with Sarah Foster, Rube Foster's wife.
Oh, this.
And they dedicated Rube Foster Field, which existed, I think, for maybe 20, 30 years. And then eventually they built a school on top of it.
Hmm.
So in Sierra Vista. So it doesn't exist anymore, but this is one of the photographs that was there in the museum. Going back in time, the 9th Cavalry from 1920, 21. There might be some overlap with the 25th Infantry, like who's competed against them. I
Hmm.
think maybe I saw some articles. This is, I don't know what year this is, but this is one of the old photographs they had on that display, just a newspaper. Maybe you recognize some of the names. I've seen Hollingsworth quite a bit,
Yes.
but some of the other names look fairly new to me.
Yeah, this one's just a company team too, so it's
Yeah,
not.
Company L. Yeah,
Yeah, but definitely Hollingsworth. Hollingsworth was in the 25th Infantry for a very long time, from what I heard. He didn't always play on the team, but he was in the unit for a long time.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, I thought it was interesting that the newspaper is called The Bullet at Fort Huachuca. At some point, the 25th Infantry team changed, they dropped the records and became the Bullets. I noticed that in the Arizona newspaper.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. This photograph right here says
That's
it's company.
that's
Which company?
Jasper right in the middle, right?
Yeah. Jasper's in the middle. Isn't that Heavy Johnson at the far right? Oh, no. Or
Kneeling?
is
I
that
don't.
Swinton as a catcher?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure. It's
And then
probably
Lem
it's
Hawkins
closer to
on the far
Swinton.
left.
Yeah, that does look like Lem. I haven't seen this photo before.
Yeah.
What year is this one? Does it say? No.
No, it doesn't. But I think the reference was Schofield Barracks.
Oh, wow.
And notice there's a cute little dog in the middle, usually the mascot.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, this is one of the photographs that was on that display, and they Stephen had shared it with me. Oh, Company A, it says on that gentleman's shirt in the back.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Then we're going back to 1905, Fort Robinson, Nebraska. One of the earlier versions. This is must be Company C, perhaps.
Hmm.
I'm not sure, but this was a photograph they had associated with the uh, the Wreckers or the 25th Infantry,
Oh,
1905. Had you seen this before?
I hadn't seen that one either. No.
Yeah,
Trying to like the
yeah,
HC. I'm not sure.
yeah. I'm not sure either.
Um,
So
yeah, just trying to think if it was the fort. Yeah, so many different places that could go.
okay.
But yeah, those are
Well,
not
we'll
players that I
mentally
know.
bookmark this, and together we can find the true story behind it,
Mhm.
which actually might be available. I thought maybe because we had referenced it before. This book right here, the Buffalo Soldier Regiment. Is it John Nankivel? Is that how you would say
Yes.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
great book, and it references going all the way back to early 1900s, 1890s. So some of
Yeah.
these
That.
players might be in there.
Yeah. That one's fantastic. That's you see like early references to Swinton and
Yeah,
Jasper in there as well.
yeah, yeah. All right. So those are just some of the photographs that they've shared with me, and I'm not sure if they're in the public domain. I have seen copyrights with Fort Huachuca. Um, so anyway, just wanted to share that with you as we go
Mhm.
forward and making sure that we communicate with them if we're going to use it in any of the research.
Got it.
Uh, why did I put this in here? Oh, I wanted to just kind of as a segue, because one of the questions was why is the 25th Infantry important? And to me, they're just as important as the Philadelphia Royal Giants, who are a very important uh, team and impetus for international baseball relations. And you think about, I think Hawaii is such an important historical baseball location. From an international standpoint, I like to consider everybody who went back and forth as trans-Pacific barnstormers, and
Mhm.
almost all of them had to stop in Hawaii.
Right.
And it went both ways. You had teams from Japan coming over to the US, they would stop in Hawaii as well. So it was really a multicultural uh, international hub. And the 25th Infantry played an important role in that, in exposing different cultures, different countries to African American and players and in culture as well. So that's one. And I wanted to just connect the dots. I think they're an earlier version and an important version of the Philadelphia Royal Giants in terms of Negro League pioneers and advocates for not just black baseball, but for all of baseball. So just wanted to share that. Um, so there's been some historical, I guess, question about where this cup came from. Some people think they received it in Japan, but actually they received it in Hawaii during their trip on the way back.
Oh,
It
cool.
was actually during this photograph, uh, this article here. It says June 27th, 1927. A large silver cup and a pennant were presented to the Giants by the Hawaii Undokai, a Japanese sports organization, for their stellar performance. So,
Oh, wow.
some people think that that cup was given to them by the Prime Minister of Japan, and that wasn't the case. They
Hmm.
did visit the royal palace, but we're really not sure if they interacted with the Japanese uh, premier over there. But I wanted to share this photograph for a few reasons. This is the huge panoramic from that one picture. What's cool about it is it shows some of the players who really don't get a whole lot of attention from the tour. Frank Duncan, Jesse Walker, who went on to become Hoss Walker. I don't know if you know that name, but he's the Negro League manager.
That's so hilarious because
Yes.
I somehow got signed up to doing his for doing his Saber bio as well.
Okay. Well, he's an important figure with some of these early tours.
Oh boy, then
Uh,
I'm going to be talking to you about that.
okay. Andy Cooper and Alexander, I believe it's Slow Time Evans. They misspelled Evans here. But through my research, I found that he was Biz Mackey's brother-in-law. I'm not sure who married whose sister, but they're related through marriage. So these are some of the lesser known players, but three over is uh, Fagan. That's Robert Fagan in
Oh,
the
oh,
Royal Giants uniform. We have a guy named Joe Cade, John Riddle, who is actually a running back, the second player over, running back for USC, the first
hmm.
African American from USC to play in the Rose Bowl.
Oh, wow.
Then a gentleman at the far end, his name is Junior Green. And then I'm bypassing the popular players who are holding the pennant and the cup. George Ire was from Japan. He served as the tour manager for the Royal Giants. And I'm going to bring this back to the 25th Infantry, by the way. But here we have a guy named James Moriyama playing second base. Um, he actually played in the game with the Chinese Travelers when they defeated the 25th Infantry Wreckers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And then here at the far right is Andy Yamashiro, the right fielder. He also played in that game, and I'll explain why. And three over is Bozo Wakabayashi.
Hmm.
He is one of the first Hall of Famers in Japan, born in Hawaii. So he is Nisei, Japanese American, but he played his career in Japan.
Awesome.
Um, this Moriyama, he played in Fresno, California. So again, Hawaii is a really interesting spot where some players either went to Japan or went to the mainland and played in California and joined the leagues there. And then the final part I wanted to share about this is notice off to the far left, all the wood and everything and the wicker.
Hmm.
That's where the 25th Infantry are sitting. So this is that same field.
Oh,
So as it all comes together. So they all played at that same ballpark there. But
that's
what I
awesome.
wanted to share is the Chinese travelers. I put Chinese in parentheses because, and I apologize if this is too small, but here's the game where the travelers defeated the 25th Infantry Wreckers, December what 5th maybe 1915 by a score of 6-2. You'll see listed Moriyama, second
Hmm.
base, then Yamashiro in left field. And then there's one Chinese player I'd like to point out, Lai Tin. I want to talk about him in a little bit, but
Oh yeah.
all the other players with the 25th we've referenced, Rogan, Johnson, etc. So we all recognize the 25th as being great ball players. So I think it's worth discussing how really good were these Chinese traveler ball players. And I'm not taking away anything from any of the players and the caliber of their play. What I really want to do is elevate the other players who don't get any recognition, like Andy Yim and Moriyama and Lai Tin. And I think that's the other important piece of this story. Because the Wreckers and the Philadelphia Royal Giants played all these other cultural teams and communities, it really showed the caliber of play that they had in terms of the Japanese Americans, the Chinese Americans. I quite honestly, I haven't really dug into the Portuguese teams and some of the others, The fact that the Chinese Travelers are defeating the 25th Wreckers
Right.
says something about their play.
Yeah,
So,
some of these players would appear in lineups under the name All Chinese team. Some of them were in the Chinese
yeah,
Travelers, but like so many of those names you just showed, Ensu, Buck Lai, Lai
yeah.
Tin,
So
Lang
you know Buck
Akana.
Lai in the story of Buck Lai?
I know some of Buck Lai.
Okay, great, great.
Yeah.
Well, a really interesting thing about James Moriyama here. Notice it said C Moriyama in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
His nickname was Chinito, which is really interesting for a couple reasons. One, in Spanish, it means Chinese, but he's not Chinese. He's
Hmm.
Japanese American. Two is it kind of speaks to the cross cultural interaction. Maybe the Portuguese or some of the other Latin American influences gave him that nickname, but he embraced it. He died with the name Chinito Moriyama, and he was the coach, and that's everybody knew him by that. What I think is really interesting is that you think to 2000, was it 17? Yuri Gurriel, when
Mm-hmm.
he got into hot trouble or hot water with what he said. I think what he did was one thing that's inexcusable, but the words he used, he called the pitcher. His name escapes me right now. Was it Darvish? It was Darvish.
I think so. Yeah.
He used the word Chanito in describing him. And people said, well, he's ignorant because he doesn't know that Darvish is really Japanese and he's calling him Chinese. But I tend to think, going all the way back to, what is this, 1927? He had the nickname in 1917, that there's some sort of deep cultural reference for Latin communities to call all people of Asian ancestry Chinito. So I think Gurriel's comments at least deserve some sort of historical perspective. So anyway, I think it's kind of interesting that here's
Yeah.
somebody who embraces that term, but yet Gurriel got in trouble for at least using the word. Again, what he did with his hands and his eyes are a whole nother thing. That's
Right.
inappropriate. But anyway, just wanted to share that for some historical context. The other thing is Andy Yamashiro here on the far right. This is him with the Honolulu Asahi. He did join the Chinese Travelers in 1913 through 1916. This is the team, just one of the photographs you can find through the Library of Congress. It lists all where they toured in 1913. There's Buck Lai at the far end. Tin Lai was his name then. But this article here from 1935, it's written by Buck Lai Tin. This is in Honolulu, and he wrote a series of articles talking about baseball back then. And he
Hmm.
says 20 years ago in 1950, Andy Yim Yamashiro, which is he's referring to Andy Yamashiro, who went by the name Andy Yim. So he changed his identity to a Japanese, or excuse me, to a Chinese identity when he went to the U.S. and started playing.
Huh.
So here's Buck Lai and Andy Yim once they joined a professional team in Connecticut. So they both signed contracts and they're playing minor league ball. So what's really interesting is we now have the first Japanese American to play professional baseball in the mainland, but he's being identified as Chinese. So that historical opportunity to celebrate that has been missed. So now we need to like re-educate people that really the first Japanese American was Andy Yim, but who was Andy Yamashiro. And then, of course, this is a photograph of Buck Lai when he was, I think, maybe signed by the Giants and never really got a chance to play. My understanding is they call him a phantom major leaguer, where he was on the roster but never appeared in a game.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, this is 1918. So Andy Yamashiro would eventually go on and run for politics in Honolulu, and he was a prominent politician. Um, so here's Buck Lai on the baseball reference page, which is just his when he was born, doesn't have his full information. But here's Andy Yim, doesn't have when he was born or when he died, but yet we know he was Andy Masayoshi Yamashiro, and we have all the dates of when he was born and when he died. So if Baseball Reference would like to update that and put
Hmm.
in that Andy Yim was Andy Yamashiro, the Japanese American baseball history community would appreciate that.
I might know a guy.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of interesting. And what's really interesting is the parallels with modern day baseball. Mike Lum, who played for the Atlanta Braves, Cincinnati Reds. You familiar with Mike Lum?
Vaguely, yeah, a
Okay.
little bit.
Well, he's identified as a Chinese American from Hawaii, but he was actually born Japanese American, but he was adopted. But
Mm.
he's one the first Japanese American to play Major League Baseball when he signed with the Atlanta Braves in 1966, 67. But yet that recognition is lost because of his adopted identity.
Mm.
So anyway, everyone's always kind of looking to recognize and celebrate the first, but sometimes it's not black and white. Sometimes it's gray and complicated.
Right.
And so that's what a lot of this history is, by the way. It is kind of complicated. You asked the question about, in addition to the primary players, who are some of my favorites. And I wanted to just talk about Robert Fagan a little bit
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
he was featured prominently in General Black Giants because of his role with the 1927 tour. Just wanted to highlight the fact that he's a really tough individual to research because his name is spelled different
Mhm.
depending on where he lived and when he played, etc. So I've seen it with EN, AN, and IN. I just went with the AN here because that was kind of the popular press, but I've even seen some of his writings with EN. So he's from Kentucky, died in Texas. For this particular bio, this is from General Black Giants. I did a feature on every player who was involved and just highlighted the tours that he was involved in. The 1927 tour to Asia, which included Japan, China, Korea, and then also stops in Hawaii. And I included 1928 because he went to Hawaii. So it was a sole Hawaii tour with O'Neill Pullen with a team called the Cleveland Giants. They renamed themselves. But I have an entire appendix just on Robert Fagan in the book because Robert Fagan, when he moved to California in the early 1920s, became a prominent coach and player on the West Coast. But he was also a well respected manager and a writer as well. He would write for the local paper, the local black paper, and share his opinions on coaching and managing players and his philosophy. He seemed to be a real authentic and genuine individual who people really respected his approach to the game, and just a really respected coach as well. So I wanted to share that.
It's
Um,
awesome.
I also wanted to, I introduced it earlier, but in the book, General Black Giants, I'm not sure if I coined this term, but I'm throwing it out there that everybody likes to talk about the barnstorming tours of the 1920s and 30s. I think what they did getting on a ship and going across the Pacific Ocean is pretty significant. So I call
Mm.
them trans-Pacific barnstormers. So they got on a ship or a boat instead of a bus, but they spent probably just as much time or even more. So through the research, we calculated all of the tours and added them up the number of days away from home. So we've added up. There were 6 tours combined, most of them to Asia, but some of them just to Hawaii. 641 days in total, almost 52,000 miles, 47 individuals involved. And then I ranked or listed all of the individuals involved by what percentage of the tours they participated in. So
Wow.
Robert Fagan was involved in 30% of the tours of Negro Leaguers across the Pacific. Again, which is just the one to Japan or Asia, but then Hawaii. But you can see some of the other ones as well who are listed in here. Lon Goodwin was involved in most of them. Andy Cooper, O'Neill Poland, Alexander Evans. A lot of Cuban players participated
Hmm.
in these tours. Quite honestly, these are names that I was not 100% familiar with, but you can see them in some of the photographs here as well.
And there's Haas
And
Walker
then,
popping up.
yep, and yeah, Jesse Walker on the bottom. So I wanted to share that to connect the dots that Fagan um, was the most active Trans-Pacific Barnstormer who played for the 25th Infantry, uh, more so than Wilbur Rogan. Rogan gets a lot of press for his Of course, his great play, but even his international impact. But he actually never played in Japan.
Hmm.
During that particular tour, they got rained out when they were in Japan. So they passed through, they had dinner, but then they went on to the Philippines or
Hmm.
in other locations. I just wanted to share a highlight of what that chapter looks like. Bob Fagan, he wrote about my experience as a baseball manager. It's 6 parts, just basically pulled it in from the newspaper articles, but he highlights his experiences and opinions on managing and players today, today being 1924. But I wanted to point out to you because he would pop in 25th Infantry references to his
Hmm.
comparisons. So right in the middle here, he says, I have a youngster at shortstop named Hines. He has the making of a great boy if he's handled right. And with a seasoned player or myself on his right, I believe another Walter Moore can be made of him.
Hmm.
So that's his reference for good ball playing with his time with the 25th Infantry.
And for those that may not know the first name Walter, that is Dobie Moore.
That is Dobie. Yep. Next, let's see. Why did this one catch my eye? Oh, just the title of this article itself. He said, "I will call this article West versus East." I'm not going to read it verbatim, but in summary, he made a choice. He left professional baseball in the East and he moved to California for quality of life.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that most historians don't understand. That they think that a ball player who wasn't playing for a team in the East wasn't of a caliber to make it. But yet, there were actually a lot of really good ball players who chose not to play north of the Mason Dixon line, east of the Mississippi River, because life was better in California, more sunshine, better pay, just beautiful nature, etc. And so that's what he's describing here is that it was his choice to leave the East. And I think that is still reflected in the research today. Like even the fact that they identified uh, all these teams that are considered major league, you don't have any or most like down in Texas before 1920. It's 1920 above the Mason-Dixon line and east of the Mississippi.
Right.
So Fagan was aware of that even back then. O'Neill Pullen was aware of it. So I just wanted to point that out that they were talking about this back then. Then the final thing, I think it's in here. There were a few Jasper references. Jasper had left the 25th Infantry and moved out to California and was coaching teams. And he asked Fagan to take over his team, which was called the All Stars at one point. So it's interesting that Jasper keeps popping up in Fagan's career. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to share that with you in case you were following Jasper and where he went after the infantry.
Yeah, I had no idea that Fagan was even. Oh, I had seen that he'd been in the California Winter League in a couple seasons, but I
Oh
didn't know.
yeah,
But other than that, I hadn't known any of this. So this is, yeah, this I love this. This is great.
yeah. And then the final line just here in his article, if he basically if he was going to give any advice to any ball player, it's to go home and stay home at night, like don't go out and drink. And so he might have been pretty straight laced and you know in bed by 9 and getting up early, but um, he knew what it took to be a good ball player. Oh, actually, I want to just point out one other thing that really caught my eye on this was the line that starts with "fortunately." Fortunately, great physical strength goes to hand in hand with a peace-loving disposition. For a ball player to be speaking about individuals having a peace-loving disposition, I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of speaks to his character. He seems to be kind of a gentle spirit soul, which maybe you don't really think about when it comes to ball players, Negro League ball players. So just he seems to be like a really interesting person that
Yeah,
doesn't really get a lot of attention. So his writing I thought was insightful. So that's why I included a chapter on him in that book.
that's amazing.
So I'm talking quite a bit. If you have questions, let me know.
Oh, I'm excited to dig in even more because
Okay.
now I'm focused on, like you said, following where these players ended up
Yeah.
in their post Wreckers lives. Some of them were in the major leagues, but some of them Like I look at a guy like Crafton and his
Yeah.
stats. Now that I've gone back and compiled the stats, his stats were, better than Dobie Moore for a while, better than Hawkins, and it
Yeah.
makes you wonder what happened to this guy. What's interesting about Crafton is in his final season, his stats tanked, and
Oh, okay.
you wonder a little bit if there was an injury involved there or something happened. But
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, and I think that speaks to how historians complement one another. Because I think you're bringing a nice quantitative perspective to everything that they did. But here I am pointing out that Robert Fagan was all about a peace-loving disposition, which you can't measure. There's no war for that. So
but I can
anyway,
also tell you that in 108 games, he
yeah,
hit he didn't hit a lot out there. He hit 239, but he was a
okay.
very
He
steady
hit like a
second.
guy with a peace-loving disposition, right?
He did, and he would pitch when they needed him to.
Yeah,
His hitting improved later in,
yeah,
in his career as well too. But
yeah.
for a while there, a lot of the batting averages are pretty low. Swinton is a 204 hitter in all the games I have him in, and he was considered a star. So
Okay. Well, maybe back then it was like their gloves were more important than their bats.
right. I mean, the dead ball era also seemed
Yeah,
to carry itself to, Hawaiian Islands and things like that. But then,
yeah,
then you look at Johnson and Rogan, and then wow, they're just heads and shoulders above everyone else.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to share next how the story was connected with Zenimura and the Black Giants, just a little bit in greater detail.
Absolutely.
So I had mentioned, how I started to learn about the records through my research with Zenimura. I'm not going to do a full exhaustive summary of the book. Actually, I just have one slide on Zenimura, and this was my pitch for him to be in the Hall of Fame. If and when the Hall of Fame allows individuals who didn't play in the major leagues or the Negro Leagues, we're having conversations with the Hall of Fame now because technically, the way that they had set up the rules, non-major league players should be considered. Like, well, not players, but individuals, and he
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't go in as a player. He at best was like a 270 hitter. It's really more about his influence as a pioneer.
Right.
Um, oh, I can't even read all of this because all the stuff that's over the screen. But
I could take
Zenimura,
it if you want.
oh yeah, go ahead. Let's hear it from
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
else. Okay.
Yeah. Recognized as the father of Japanese American baseball, Zenimura, 1900 to 1968, was a celebrated player, manager, league organizer, and global ambassador who used the game to break down barriers during his 40-year career, 1915 to 1955. He led 3 goodwill tours to Asia, 1924, 27, and 37, and played key roles in inspiring other tours, including the Negro League Philadelphia Royal Giants in 1927 and Babe Ruth in 1934, that spurred the start of pro baseball in Japan in 1936. During World War II, he was incarcerated at Gila River, Arizona, where he built a diamond in the desert that gave hope to thousands behind barbed wire. After the war, he helped improve U.S.-Japan relations by facilitating tours on both sides of the Pacific and continuing to scout American ball players for professional teams in Japan.
Yeah. So then we listed his teams here. So this is just our wish list, if you will, or envisioning him being celebrated by the Hall of Fame. It's kind of a stretch for him to be enshrined, but at a minimum, our goal is to have a permanent exhibit in the Baseball Hall of Fame. At first, it was for Japanese American baseball, but we now recognize the need to have something that celebrates all of Asian American baseball influence. So Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans. I think it can be that comprehensive. So
Mhm.
we're having conversations with the Hall of Fame now. I think our best bet is late 2024. There's some talk about an exhibit of U.S. Japan baseball relations, laying the foundation for when Ichiro is inducted in 2025.
Mhm.
So that's what we're looking towards now.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been just toying with the idea of how interesting, just going by the name of this podcast, an outsider baseball Hall of Fame might be. Where
Yeah,
if they only want to call it the National Baseball Hall of Fame, well, what does a Baseball Hall of Fame look like if it's just those that are not eligible, so to speak,
Yeah,
where you've
yeah,
got your players who spent the vast majority of their career in Cuba or Puerto Rico or Japan or anywhere. It's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. This is just a one slide summary about the early influence because Zenimura had toured Japan in 1924, went to Fukuoka City, made some connections. Of course, he's from Japan originally as well. He actually taught and coached there in about 1921, going back and forth. But you'll see that it was not the Philadelphia Royal Giants that were invited to go to Japan. It was the LA White Sox.
Hmm.
And that's the strong connection that kind of cements it for Zenimura. That's the team he knew and played against. And so, anyway, that's what this article here we were just highlighting, that it wasn't the Royal Giants that most people know that were invited to Japan. Lon Goodwin changed the name, went with his Winter League brand versus his off Winter League team, the LA White Sox.
Right. So, I mean, just to kind of give some background to the other listeners, because I feel like
Yeah.
this might be going a little deep between just the two of I, but the two of us, but the LA White Sox were a team in the California Winter League. Typically, uh, it was several white teams, and there would be one African American team in the California Winter League. Oftentimes, it was heavily populated by members of the Monarchs. Later years, it would that was just in the 1920s and like that Dobie era, Dobie Moore era
Mm-hmm.
that I'm focused on. But I'm sure it was vastly different. I'm working through Bill McNeil's book on it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who the LA White Sox were. And what year was this that the tour was? This 27?
Uh, that tour was 1927. But the LA White Sox and their relationship with the Fresno Athletic Club, the Japanese American team, goes back to 1925.
Mm-hmm.
So they played 1925, then they had a rematch, a doubleheader, 1926, and that's when the tour was initiated, and then 1927.
And that's where you see like names like George Tank Carr, who were part of that. He was part of the California Winter League for a long time, starting with his relationship with the Monarchs, going over there, and then he just played there forever. I think
Yeah,
he's a record holder in many categories or something in the California Winter League as well, or up there.
yeah. So that's a really interesting point as well, and it goes back to that article that Fagan wrote about East versus West. Most people don't even appreciate the fact that baseball was in California prior to 1958, and the Dodgers and the Giants. There's a whole rich history, not just African American baseball, but Asian American, and even the Pacific Coast League at one point was considered a third major league.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is really significant when you have a team like the Salt Lake City Bees in 1923, I think it was, maybe 24. I'll have to double check the years. But they played against Zenimura's Fresno Athletic Club, and the athletic club won 6-4. Tony Lazzeri was on that team. Um, Lefty O'Doul was not, but they got him like right after, and they had a rematch, and then the Salt Lake City Bees won with Lefty O'Doul. But that's kind of cool because O'Doul is in the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame
Right.
because he's a great ambassador for the two countries. That was his first introduction to Japanese ball players. Was Zenimura's Fresno Athletic Club
Oh,
there
wow.
in California. So, why am I sharing this? Oh, why is the tours important for the General Black Giants and the Philadelphia Royal Giants? This is the main argument that Kaz Sayama makes is that you think about all these major league tours that were coming over and just really uh, ridiculing the Japanese players who were trying to learn the game, and their morale was really dropping. And so Sayama says that the Negro League ball players were the shock absorbers. So, and he explains other countries rejected baseball because the visiting professionals left fledgling players disillusioned with the game through defeat. But we were lucky enough to have a chance to neutralize the shock. The Royal Giants visits were the shock absorbers for us. So, whereas the white major leaguers showed up and said, "Hey, we're experts. We're going to show you how to play this game," the Negro leaguers showed up and said, "Hey, we're friends. Let us show you how to play. Or let's play together." And so they almost approached it as though they were like coaches,
Mm.
and they really helped them learn the finer points of the game and did so with a sense of confidence and respect. But that's really what Sayama is arguing with his book here.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because the last episode was with Jorge Colon Delgado about Negro Leaguers in Puerto Rico, and I
Oh,
was reading a lot about the same thing where they would go and they would play on the weekends, but during the week they were conducting clinics in the towns and everything, showing
nice,
everybody on the island how to play, and it was a beautiful relationship they had.
nice, nice. And I wanted to point this out because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in terms of the statement that Sayama made that without the Negro Leaguers, baseball wouldn't have started in Japan. What he really meant was the timing. He does think that eventually baseball would have started, but it would have started when it did without the Royal Giants in their tours of the 20s and 30s. So, and I think this is correct here. Let me make sure. So he said, baseball has in it many elements that appeal to the Japanese mind, and it may safely be said that professional baseball would have been born in the course of time. Without the visits of the gentlemanly and accessible Royal Giants, however, I don't think it would have seen the light of day as early as 1936. So think about the war. It was coming in 1940, 41. Things would have been delayed. Professional baseball probably wouldn't have started until the late 40s, perhaps even the early 50s.
Mhm.
Instead, the Japanese Professional Baseball League started in 1936. So that's all Sayama was arguing. Some people say that the Negro Leaguers introduced baseball to Japan. That's not correct. Baseball was introduced in 1872, and they had been playing the game for a long period of time. It was just the timing, again, when they appeared to counter and balance the white major league tours. And so, with that, there's this big argument out there: who helped start professional baseball in Japan? I think a lot of the credit needs to go to the Japanese people themselves, who went to the U.S., learned the game, and
Right.
really built their leagues. But if you want to give any kind of credit to either the Negro Leaguers or the white major leaguers, I don't think it's a. Um, I think both can be recognized, and that's what I argue here. Is that you think about it as a business, professional baseball league, you need to have the supply, the product, and then you need the demand, the people who are going to pay for it. And I really do think you can't take away from the excitement that Babe Ruth built or created with the fans. They really were hungry for baseball after those tours. But I think the supply, the quality of the players, and the play that they put on the field, a lot of that credit goes to the Negro Leaguers as well. So I think you can have both. I think both deserve some recognition and credit for different aspects of the professional game. So just wanted to share that, and
Yeah.
I present that in the context of this book. All right.
Yeah, this is great.
Uh, yeah, and then finally, just a lot of confusion or need some clarity about who were the Royal Giants. There's actually three tiers of players. You had your Hall of Famers, Biz Mackey. I think Rap Dixon will be recognized as a Hall of Famer. Andy Cooper was part of that. You had some of the major league caliber players. Frank Duncan's not in the Hall of Fame, but he's a great player. Then you had some great Cuban leaguers coming over. And then the semi-pro level players, John Riddle, who I'd mentioned earlier, AJ Johnson. There's actually a really interesting white collar contingency among this team. AJ Johnson was a lieutenant in the LA Police Department. Let's see, there was John Riddle was an architect. So you had these players who had these jobs outside of the game, but chose to participate in this tour. So I think that might have offset, uh, just their whole presence in Japan and why they were perceived as gentle and
Mm.
gentlemanly. Yeah. And then the final thing I want to add with kind of the sake reference.
Hmm.
It went the other way with a ball player named Rogan Itaru Miyanachi. And he was a young man who was born, I believe, in 1903 in Hawaii. I found an article. Oh, is this the correct one? I'm sorry, this is misplaced. This was the Jasper All Stars. I'm gonna have to go back. Remember, I said Jasper was in California.
Yeah, I noticed
Uh,
this right away. Jasper's All Stars with Fagan there.
yeah. So these are some of the in Killingsworth is in there as well. So Jasper had a team, and this was the one that Fagan took over. So this is July of 1924. Sorry, I meant to share that earlier. It's out of place. But anyway, I wanted you to know about that. That was the documentation to support Jasper out there. But this is what I wanted to share. So this was an article, I believe, from 1917 that featured Wilbur Rogan in the top right, and in the bottom left was this summary of a game between a Japanese team called the Mizuhos and then Company G. I'm assuming from Schofield Barracks. But there's a player in here by the name of Miyanishi, who was playing for the Japanese team. Mm-hmm. And later on, he would move to California, and he changed his name is Itaru, but he changed his name to Rogan. This article incorrectly says that he changed his name after seeing Bullet Rogan in his first trip to the Orient. That's not the case. Itaru Miyanishi grew up in Hawaii and watched Bullet Joe Rogan play with the 25th Infantry. So he was a member of this team in California, the Stockton Yamato. He eventually moved on to Chicago, and he was a member of the Buddhist church, and this is his death record. And so he legally changed his name from Itaru to Rogan. And so he died as Rogan Miyanishi in Chicago. Wow. So to me, that's just fascinating that the Japanese American community embraced these ball players almost to a point where they loved them and idolized them. And you have this individual who changed his name in honor of Bullet Rogan. Pretty cool.
This is amazing stuff.
Yeah. So I believe that might be it. I know I've shared a lot, but I mean, they're an incredible team, a lot of interesting characters. Their impact is more than just the years they played in Hawaii and Arizona. The ripple effects, the players going out and impacting the different leagues and the communities they lived in and the countries they traveled in, really impressive. And of course, you and I appreciate them and celebrate them, but I think more people should as well, right?
100%. This all started with just, trying to tabulate some stats to put into a Heavy Johnson bio, and you just pull on all of these different strings and fall into these different rabbit holes. And I care so deeply now about each one of these players on this roster that I almost don't even know what to say about. I'm learning more about Jasper and Fagan here, and it's so amazing to learn more about them. And it just makes me realize how much more I have to learn. It makes me want to know, what happened to Allie Craft and where did James Waterhouse end up? It's just this group that I don't know. I've just really taken to for some reason. It's been great to chat with you about them as well, because I can see they've done the same to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the way I felt as a young man about the names Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, I respect them, but I had heard so much about them, I was kind of bored with their stories. I almost feel the same way now. I really respect these two individuals about the name, but Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. Their stories have been exhausted, and I'm sure they're probably more dimensional than the press that's out there, has led us to believe. But these other players that are being ignored at the expense of those stories continuing to be told and retold and retold, I think there's a great opportunity and a great wealth of information out there. It's a gold mine that just needs to be mined by historians like us. So let's keep doing it.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I recently presented to the Josh Gibson Foundation, and I'm going to not correct myself, but I just want to say I do respect him as a ball player and that organization and what they do. I need to confess that I named my son Joshua Henry after Josh Gibson and Hank Aaron.
Oh, wow.
And about age 10, he told me, way too much pressure for me to play baseball with names like that. So he's a basketball player and a musician. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Both wonderful things as well.
Yeah,
I was just asked by Sean Gibson to take part in the same series, and I'm thinking that it might be something on the 25th Infantry records. We'll see.
All right. Well, if I can help you in any way with some of the information I have, or
you already are.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, hey, if there's anything else you need to know, just go ahead and ask, or otherwise, it was an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this.
Yeah, I think my parting question will be, what are you working on now? What's next?
Uh, well, it's the 80th anniversary of baseball in the incarceration camps. So 1943 was when Zenimura Field opened up in Arizona. So we're doing a celebration and an exhibit here in Arizona. So that opens up January 25th, kind of pre-Cactus League, but it's going to be open all throughout spring training. And then our goal is to get back into the Major League All-Star game, which will be in Seattle. It has a great Japanese American baseball history there. And then after that, we're trying to get the exhibit back to Cooperstown for the Ichiro induction. So that's taking up a lot of my time. Research and writing wise, not doing anything new in baseball. I've got a commitment to partner on the Chet Brewer bio.
Oh.
I started that a while ago as a byproduct of him participating in the final tour of 33, 34. But life got in the way and I needed to get some help. And so I have a partner on that. And so that's my only baseball commitment. But quite honestly, there's other sports out there that I'm kind of interested in. So I'm fascinated with the baseball football intersection. And so I'm starting to do a little bit of football research as well. So,
Uh, the only football research I'm doing is reading about Dobie Moore being the wide receiver on the 25th football team. So
oh,
I've got an eye out for that. I want to confirm it. I did read it in one place that he was, but
okay. Yeah. Well, as you learn about different Negro League players, and there's a lot of multi-sport crossover connections.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, all right, Adam. Thank you for your time, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this.
Excellent. Where can people follow you online?
They can go to zenimura.com, and that will get them to my blog, International Pastime.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
All right.
Bill. This was so enlightening, and I really, I'm so happy that we finally got to connect like this.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care.
You take care. Bye bye.
Bye.